I, together with my sister-in-law, welcomed a new life into the world. At that time, I was extremely feeble, yet my mother-in-law secretly swapped our child. And taking advantage of their complacency and carelessness, I surreptitiously the child. My sister-in-law spared no expense and exhausted all her resources to purchase imported milk powder for my son. However, her own son could only subsist on rice soup. When her son was on the verge of death due to severe malnutrition and was rushed into the intensive care unit, I was leisurely and comfortably feeding my son imported milk powder. I couldn't help but shake my head and sigh, saying, "I'm afraid your aunt still doesn't know that she has been mistreating her own biological son all this time." Just as I stepped through the door of my home, my sister-in-law, Cheng Yan, arrived right after. She stood at the door with a beaming smile, holding several buckets of imported milk powder, and looked at my son with deep affection in her eyes. She said, "Sister-in-law, I've bought several more buckets of imported milk powder for Lele. They are all made from pure and natural high-quality milk sources." Then she continued, "Sister-in-law, don't be stingy with spending money on Lele. He is the precious grandson of our Chung family after all." Leaning against the doorframe, I sneered and said, "Lele is the grandson of the Lin family. Your brother is a man who married into our family, you know." Cheng Yan didn't get the response she wanted. She gave me a disdainful look and said, "So what if he's a man who married into your family? Lele has the blood of our Chung family flowing through his veins." She went on to say, "Besides, do you still think you're the former daughter of the Lin family? Your parents are no longer with us, and the Lin family no longer bears the Lin surname. You're not even as good as me now." Hearing her words, I lowered my eyes, and a deep-seated hatred welled up in my eyes. "Even though the Lin family has declined, it's not your place to humiliate me." My mother-in-law came out of the bedroom upon hearing the commotion. She trotted over and took the milk powder from Cheng Yan's hands, trying to smooth things over. She said, "Xiao Yan, stop talking nonsense. Yining is also a member of our family now. There's no such thing as who's better or worse. Don't say such things again in the future." After saying that, she pulled Cheng Yan into the house. I cast a look of revulsion at Cheng Yan's back, only to see a skinny child on her back. Presumably, this is her son Go Jian. Looking at the child's appearance, a chill ran down my spine. Fortunately, my best friend delivered my baby at that time, and I managed to swap the children back in time. Otherwise, it would be my son who is emaciated and sallow-faced lying on Cheng Yan's back now. Looking at the pitiful child, a wave of compassion welled up in my heart. I stepped forward and asked with concern, "Is Xiao Jian ill? Why is he so thin and weak?" Cheng Yan hooked her arm through my mother-in-law's and, as they walked into the house, she sneered and said, "He's always been like this. He's been weak since birth, not presentable at all, and there's no hope that he'll live long. I might as well have raised a cat or a dog for entertainment." After saying that, she casually threw the child onto the sofa. The child might have been hurt from the fall, and he opened his mouth and started crying. His cry was as faint as a mosquito's hum, and it died down after just a few whimpers. Cheng Yan gave Go Jian a look of disgust, and casually threw him a pacifier. Then she immediately turned around, happily took my son from my hands, hugged him tightly, rubbed against him, and kissed him. She said, "Our Lele is so adorable. Look at his little mouth and his eyes. He looks just like my brother. Oh, you're so cute, my little baby. Your auntie loves you so much." My son was giggling with delight at Cheng Yan's teasing, and Cheng Yan couldn't bear to let go of him. Of course, just look at who gave birth to him, and whose genes he has. My mother-in-law looked very proud. When she said this, her eyes never left Cheng Yan and my son, as if my son was actually born to Cheng Yan. Indeed, in their hearts, my son is considered to be born to Cheng Yan, and the child I gave birth to is the very one they despise so much, Go Jian. I looked annoyed and picked up the feeding bottle, intending to take my son back from Cheng Yan's arms. But before my hand could touch the child, Cheng Yan slapped my hand away. She said, "What are you doing? You've been holding him for so long. Can't I hold him for a while? I am his aunt after all." I pursed my lips and turned to look at Go Jian, who was lying on the sofa looking pitiful. I offered the already prepared milk powder to his mouth. Before the pacifier could reach Go Jian's mouth, Cheng Yan snatched it away and said viciously, "This milk powder is for Lele. How does this despicable child deserve to drink it? He only deserves to drink rice soup." After saying that, she stuffed the pacifier into my son's mouth, stood up, and carried my son while pulling my mother-in-law into the bedroom. Before closing the door, my mother-in-law didn't forget to instruct me. "Yining, hurry up and cook a couple of dishes. Xiao Yan didn't have breakfast this morning." I was so angry that I actually laughed. She really treats me like a free maid. Since she's willing to treat my son as her own, let her. I couldn't ask for more. That there's one more person to love my son. However, I really can't figure out why they swapped the two children, when they cherished their own son so much. I changed my clothes, and went out to buy 4 dishes and a soup for them. When I came back with the food, Go Jian was still sleeping with his eyes closed. I turned around and went to the bedroom to call my mother-in-law and Cheng Yan for dinner. Just as I reached the bedroom door, I heard the mother-daughter pair whispering inside. Xiao Yan, have you bought all the insurance? I don't think that child will make it through the night. Don't worry, Mom. The 1 million yuan insurance policy was bought a long time ago. He's been living mostly on rice soup for the past 6 months. His body has long since given out. He definitely won't make it through the night. As soon as he dies, the money will be in our hands. Good. The sooner he dies, the sooner he can be reborn. And we can get a large sum of money. It's worth it. My mother-in-law nodded in satisfaction. Cheng Yan looked at Lei in her arms with affection and continued. This 1 million yuan is enough for the two of us to live on. A friend of mine in the hospital saw Lin Yan's physical examination results. She has cancer now and won't live for more than 2 years. All the things left to her by Lin Yan's parents will eventually belong to Lei. When the time comes, we'll claim the child, and the two of us can just wait to live a life of luxury. Listening to the conversation between the two, my stomach churned. So these two had gone to so much trouble, just for the money my parents left me. 5 years ago, my parents died in a car accident. The company was also taken over by other directors, and they only gave me a dividend of 3 million yuan per year. Although I disagreed, I had no real power in the company, and could only let them do as they pleased. Fortunately, I met Qing Liang. Under his tender care and comfort, I gradually emerged from the shadows. Later, he said he wanted to marry me. Afraid that I would think too much, he was willing to marry into my family, and gave me a home. Indeed, this villa and the 3 million yuan annual dividend were simply a huge sum of money to Cheng Yan. No wonder she had schemed so hard to swap children with me. Thinking of this, I let out a long sigh and concealed the emotions on my face before knocking on the door of my mother-in-law's bedroom. Mother-in-law Xiao Yan, it's time to eat. Hearing my voice, my mother-in-law replied nervously, Oh, got it. Hearing a rustling sound coming from the bedroom, I immediately left and sat down at the dining table. My mother-in-law and Cheng Yan came out of the bedroom with beaming smiles on their faces. After sitting down at the dining table, my mother-in-law began to ask tentatively, Yinin, have our physical examination results come out? How are they? I pinched my thigh hard and put on a sad face, saying, They just came out this morning. It's not looking good. It seems to be cancer. But don't worry, I will definitely. Before I could finish, my mother-in-law immediately interrupted me. Oh, Yinin, cancer is very difficult to treat. There's a risk of losing both the person and the money. Look, Lei is still so young. If there's no money, how will he survive? Cheng Yan immediately chimed in. Yes, sister-in-law. Even if you don't think about others, you have to think about Lei. What if you spend all the money and the disease isn't cured? You'll go to heaven to enjoy yourself, but Lei will have a hard life in the future. Maybe we should give up the treatment. Cheng Yan's voice got smaller and smaller, until it was barely audible. I looked up and said firmly, No way. How can we give up just because we're so young? How can we not treat it? Mother-in-law, tell me, do you want to be treated or give up? Just say the word treat, and I'll sell everything I have to pay for it. I turned my head and looked at my mother-in-law, who was playing with my son on the side, with a complex expression. There was a hint of joy that my mother-in-law couldn't hide in her eyes. Don't treat it. It can't be cured anyway. It's just a waste of money. Let's leave the money for Lei. I forced out a few tears and said sadly, Okay, I'll call the hospital right away and cancel the expert consultation tomorrow. And buy all the money into financial products, by the way. When my mother-in-law and Cheng Yan heard this, they nodded as fast as a chick pecking at food. After hanging up the phone, I took my mother-in-law's hand and cried bitterly. Mother-in-law, it's not that your daughter-in-law is unfilial. I really want to treat you. What? Treat me? Isn't it you who has cancer? My mother-in-law's eyes widened in disbelief. No, it's you. A barely perceptible arc formed at the corner of my mouth, as I handed the examination report to my mother-in-law. Cancer advanced stage. My mother-in-law was stunned instantly. Her hands went limp, and the child slipped from her hands. Fortunately, I was quick-eyed and caught the child in time. My mother-in-law and my sister-in-law had slumped to the ground, crying bitterly. I gently placed the child I was holding on the sofa. Ah, Xiao Yan, come quickly and see what's wrong with Xiao Jian. At this moment, Xiao Jian's eyes were closed, and his breathing was weak. Hearing my shout, the mother-daughter pair looked at each other in a daze, and then helped each other run to the sofa to check on Xiaoxing's condition. They must be hoping that the child will die soon. While they were checking, I quickly called the emergency number. Xiaojian was soon rushed to the hospital. Due to severe malnutrition, he was admitted to the intensive care unit. My husband Cheng Liang also rushed over in a hurry. As soon as we met, I told Cheng Liang the whole story. When Cheng Liang heard this, his brows furrowed tightly. What on earth is going on? Cheng Liang sternly questioned Cheng Yen, who was secretly pleased. Cheng Yen said indifferently, he's just a despicable child. He can't handle good things. He just loves to drink rice soup every day. Who knew it would be like this? It's all Lin Yi making a big deal out of nothing. Why come to the hospital and waste this money? Yeah, this morning he vomited all the imported milk powder he drank from Lele. He's just a lowlife. The sooner he dies, the sooner he can be reborn. My mother-in-law added on the side. She had been so dazzled by the 1 million yuan windfall that she had even forgotten about her own cancer. I was coaxing my son on the side, waiting to watch the how she. I really wanted to see if you would still say, the sooner he dies, the sooner he can be reborn, when you find out that the child you've been abusing has always been your own biological son. Soon the doctor came out in a hurry. Which of you is the child's family member? The child has severe anemia due to malnutrition and needs an emergency blood transfusion. Who is blood type O? Cheng Liang and I shook our heads helplessly and said, I'm type A. I'm type B. Suddenly my eyes lit up. The child's mother has blood type O. The doctor looked up and gave me a glare. Immediate family members can't donate blood. Notify the blood bank immediately. A 6-month-old child urgently needs type O blood. At this moment, Cheng Yen looked dazed and muttered to herself, how could this be? It's impossible. He can't have blood type O. Suddenly, as if she remembered something, she rushed to my side and tightly grabbed my arm. She asked, what blood type is Lele? I knew she was suspicious. I raised the corner of my mouth and chuckled softly. My son of course has blood type AB. Could he be type O? Then, I leaned close to Cheng Yan's ear and said contemptuously in a voice that only the two of us could hear. Oh, I forgot to tell you. On the day Lele was born after my mother-in-law swapped the children, I swapped them back. So the one lying there now is really your son, your biological son. Cheng Yan's whole body froze, and her expression instantly solidified. What did you say? I repeated word by word. I said I swapped the children back. Xiaojian is your biological son. No, it's impossible. Lele is my son. My son is Lele. Cheng Yan screamed, and reached out to snatch the child from my arms. I easily dodged by taking a step to the side. Cheng Liang pushed the hysterical Cheng Yan away forcefully and said harshly, don't think I don't know what you've done. Lele is the child of Lin Yin and me. Your son is Xiaosheng, who has been abused by you all this time. I was stunned. Cheng Liang had always known about their child swapping. No wonder he had always been cold to them. The enmity of seizing a child is irreconcilable. Cheng Yan stared at Cheng Liang in disbelief and shouted hysterically. No, Lele is my son. You're just a bastard born to a slut. You don't deserve to be Lele's father at all. Only I am the blood of the Cheng family. Lele is the grandson of the Cheng family. He is my son. Cheng Liang's eyes were blood red. His lips were trembling non-stop, and he raised his hand to hit Cheng Yan. My mother-in-law rushed forward and protected Cheng Yan behind her. She pointed at Cheng Liang's nose and cursed. What? Do you want to hit my daughter? You're an ungrateful wretch, a heartless thing. I raised you for more than 20 years. Is this how you repay me? I should have let you and that slut die together back then. Cheng Liang's raised hand froze in midair. His face was pale, and he couldn't say a word for a long time. I was shocked again. Cheng Liang was actually not my mother-in-law's son. What an earth-shattering revelation. I quickly stepped forward and took Cheng Liang's hand that was raised in midair. Unhurriedly, I took out the paternity test that I had prepared from my bag and threw it to Cheng Yan. Whose son is Lele after all? I specifically did a paternity test. I also did one for you, by the way. You're welcome. Cheng Yan snatched it and opened it with trembling hands. Immediately, tears streamed down her face. She muttered, impossible, this is impossible. My mother-in-law stepped forward and snatched the report. Her eyes widened so much that her eyeballs seemed about to pop out. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out of her mouth, and my mother-in-law fell straight to the ground unconscious. Soon, the doctor came and rushed her to the emergency room, and Cheng Yan knelt in front of the intensive care unit, pleading bitterly with the doctor to save her son. Why do it today if you regret it tomorrow? In the emergency room, the doctor was nervously performing emergency treatment on my mother-in-law, but no matter how much they tried, a person with advanced stage cancer couldn't escape the fate of death. After my mother-in-law woke up, the cancer had further deteriorated. She didn't have much time left. Cheng Liang and I unanimously decided to give up the treatment. After all, this was what my mother mother-in-law herself had said. Cancer couldn't be cured. It was a waste of money. Leave all the money to my son. My mother-in-law was taken back home and lay in bed, waiting for the arrival of death. As soon as we got home and settled my mother-in-law, I immediately called Chung Yan's husband He Rambin. When He Rambin heard that Lele was not his son, he roared on the other end of the phone. Impossible. Chung Yan said that Lele is my son. He's going to inherit the Lin Group. We're going to drive luxury cars and live in a villa in the future. You bitch, don't try to bluff me here. You and your son are about to die. Everything you have will be mine and my son's. I snorted coldly. What a pipe dream. Not to mention that I'm not going to die now. Even if I did, they wouldn't be able to get a single cent. The Lin Group is no longer mine. My dream has woken up, but they're still in a dream. I directly sent the paternity test over, and there was suddenly a deathly silence on the other side. Soon the beeping sound of the phone being hung up came from the phone. I raised the corner of my mouth. The real hushi was about to begin. When He Rambin arrived at the hospital, Chung Yan was still crying her heart out in the doctor's office, pleading with the doctor to save her son. Whose son is Lele after all? What's going on with this paternity test report? As soon as he entered the door, He Rambin grabbed Chung Yan, who was sitting on the stool, and held up his phone to question her. Chung Yan covered her face and cried bitterly. Honey, it's all Linine. We were all deceived by her. She swapped the children back again. Xiaojian is our biological son. Whoa, what? That despicable child is my son? How could this be? Then the Lin Group. Slap. He Rambin slapped Chung Yan hard across the face, and Chung Yan stumbled and fell to the ground. Bitch, you made a useless, despicable child my son. Can he give me 3 million yuan a year? He Ranbin's eyes suddenly turned fierce, as if he could devour Chung Yan alive. Chung Yan kept shaking her head and Jadal. He's not a despicable child. He's our son. He Rambin snorted coldly and turned to command the doctor. Stop the treatment immediately. It's better for the useless, despicable child to die early. The doctor looked Waynon and turned to look at Chung Yan before saying, well, the child still has a good chance of surviving. It's 2. Didn't you hear what I said? Stop it immediately. The veins on He Ranbin's forehead bulged, his blood-red eyes protruded, and he opened his big mouth and roared. The doctor shook his head helplessly. Chung Yan immediately pounced on He Rambin, grabbed his clothes, and big teardrops rolled down her pale cheeks as she begged humbly. Honey, we can't give up. He's our only son. We have to save him. Please, he's our only child. Xiaojian was indeed the only child Chung Yan would ever have in her life. 6 months ago, when Chung Yan gave birth, she had a massive hemorrhage. It took several hours of emergency treatment to save her life, but she would never be able to conceive again. Get away. Despicable child. He Rambin pushed Chung Yan away, and was about to rush into the intensive care unit to pull out the tubes. I must save him. I'll spend whatever it takes to save him. Chung Yan shouted hysterically at He Rambin. He Rambin suddenly stopped in his tracks, turned around and strode forward. He snatched Chung Yan's phone. Save? I want to see what you can use to save him without money. He was about to transfer Chung Yan's money, but when he saw the balance he was stunned. There was originally more than 100,000 yuan, but now there was only 5 yuan left. He Ranbin's big hand tightly squeezed the phone, as if he was about to crush it. After rummaging through all the cards, not a single one had any money. He Ranbin's sharp eyes suddenly turned towards Chung Yan, and his other hand shot out abruptly, tightly gripping Chung Yan's neck as He Sung drew one. Where's the money? What did you do with the over 100,000 yuan for building my mother's house? Speak. Chung Yan opened her mouth wide, stretching her neck, and stammered fearfully. The money. The money was all used to buy milk powder for my son, no for Lele. The pressure of He Ranbin's hand kept increasing, and Chung Yan's breathing became more and more difficult. Just as she was about to suffocate, He Rambin flung her away. Her head hit the table leg heavily and blood gushed out. Chung Yan, you used the money from my mother's house to buy milk powder for the despicable child in your brother's family? Who gave you the guts? You bitch, I think you're courting death. I'll beat you to death. He Rambin yanked Chung Yan up from the ground and slapped her face one after another. Then he threw her to the ground again and kicked her repeatedly. Chung Yan curled up in pain, moaning softly. Her white top was soon stained a large area with blood. The surrounding doctors quickly stepped forward to pull He Rambin away. But He Rambin was surprisingly strong, and 3 or 4 male doctors couldn't hold him back. Soon, Chung Yan was beaten until she shrank on the ground motionless. If it weren't for the occasional blood bubbles blowing out of her nose, she really would have seemed dead. He Rambin, tired from beating, stood aside and spat a mouthful of saliva. Gritting his teeth, he said, Damn whore, get the money back for me immediately. If there's even 1 cent less, I'll skin you alive. Saying this, He Rambin dragged Chung Yan with one hand and left the hospital. coming straight to my house to ask for money. I was feeding my son mouthfuls of imported milk powder. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on the door. Lin Yin Chung Liang, come out quickly. He Rambin roared at the door like a mad bull. Over 100,000 yuan was all spent on milk powder for your son. Hasn't your son died from drinking it yet? Pay back the money quickly. I opened the door and, looking at the fleshy-faced He Rambin and the blood-covered Chung Yen, sneered. I didn't spend the money, and I didn't ask for the milk powder to be bought. Why should I pay back the money? Besides, the milk powder my son drinks was all bought by me. The ones your wife bought are all over there in that pile. You can come and take them anytime you want. I stared at Chung Yen with great interest, and gestured towards the utility room with my mouth. Go and get them quickly. Maybe if you give it to your son now, you can still save him. Chung Yan's face instantly turned deathly pale, and she looked at He Rambin with terrified eyes. I didn't give my son the imported milk powder that Chung Yen bought. Even if the Lin family has declined, I don't need my son to drink milk powder bought by others. Looking at the mountain-like pile of milk powder, the two were speechless. I took the opportunity to sneer. So many cans. Do you need me to call a car for you? He Rambin turned around angrily and stared at Chung Yen, with raging flames rising in his eyes. Before he could speak, Chung Yen rushed into the house like a madwoman. Looking at the pile of unopened imported milk powder, her face turned alternately green and white. It was quite a spectacle. Suddenly, Chung Yen turned around and rushed towards the sofa, picked up Lele who was on the sofa in one go, ran to the window, and held him high, as if about to throw him out of the window. Transfer 500,000 yuan to me immediately, or I'll throw this little bastard down. It's better to destroy the fish in the net. If my son can't live, your son will have to die too. One of Lele's legs was already sticking out of the window, struggling and wriggling continuously in her hands. He could fall at any moment. Seeing this, I was so scared that I slumped to the ground, my body trembling uncontrollably. This was the 23rd floor. If Lele fell, there would be no chance of survival. I lay on the ground, gasping for breath, and begged. No, don't be impulsive. Put the child down first. I'll give the money, I'll give it. Chung Yen suddenly straightened her body and raised her chin, saying, 500,000 yuan, no, 1 million yuan. If there's even 1 cent less, I'll throw your son down and let him meet the king of hell early. Seeing that I agreed so readily, Chung Yen, like a lion making a huge demand, actually asked for 1 million yuan. But she was almost crazy now. She kept shouting, transfer the money quickly. Transfer the money. If I didn't give the money, she might really throw Lele down. I couldn't take the risk. I held onto the table and stood up shakily, picked up my phone, and tremblingly transferred 1 million yuan to her immediately. After getting the money, Chung Yen pulled the corners of her mouth, showing a Jungning smile. She directly threw Lele to the ground. My heart instantly rose to my throat. I rushed forward regardless, but it was still a step too late. Lele slipped from the tips of my fingers and fell to the ground with a thud. My heart seemed to shatter along with it. Lele! I tightly held Lele, who was crying loudly on the ground, in my arms at a loss. There was already a large egg-sized bump on Lele's forehead, and he was crying his heart out. No matter how I coaxed him, I couldn't stop him. The two took the money and turned to leave. My mother-in-law, I don't know when she had crawled out of the bedroom. She tightly grasped Chung Yan's ankle with both hands, as if she had caught a life-saving straw, and refused to let go. Xiao Yan, Mom doesn't want to die. Now that you have money, take Mom to the hospital for treatment, okay? Please take Mom away. I don't want to die. Chung Yan, her eyes blood red, turned her head and looked at the dirty mother-in-law on the ground with disgust. Without hesitation, she kicked her away and said viciously, You old hag, this money is for my son. No one else can take it. You've lived for so long. It's time for you to die. The sooner you die, the sooner you can be reborn. Isn't that what you said? My mother-in-law was kicked and fell to one side. Her head hit the corner of the wall hard. The corner of the wall was immediately stained red, and a big gash appeared on the top of my mother-in-law's head, with blood flowing continuously. Chung Yen didn't even look at my mother-in-law, who was lying on the ground with a bloody head. After handing the phone to He Rambin, the two left directly. Without caring about my mother-in-law, I immediately picked up my crying son and rushed downstairs to the hospital. On the way, I called Chung Liang and told him what had just happened. When Chung Liang rushed home, the blood on my mother-in-law's head was still flowing non-stop, and the wound on her head showed no sign of coagulating. He immediately called the emergency number. Watching my mother-in-law's face turn paler and paler. After the doctor arrived, they couldn't stop the bleeding from the wound on my mother-in-law's head no matter what. My mother-in-law died of blood loss before she could be taken to the operating table. The doctor diagnosed that due to the spread of cancer my mother-in-law In-law's blood could no longer coagulate. Although the cut was small, it had bled for too long, which was enough to be fatal. I really didn't expect that my mother-in-law would ultimately die at the hands of her only and most beloved daughter. After getting the money, He Rambin didn't go to the hospital to save Xiaojian. Instead, he kicked Cheng Yin away, stuffed the money into his own pocket and swaggered off. When I took Lei to finish the examination and returned home, I happened to see Cheng Yin wandering around the community in a daze, looking as if she had just lost her mother. Oh right, her mother had just died, but she didn't know it yet. As soon as she saw me, Cheng Yan's eyes lit up, as if she had seen a gold ingot. She rushed forward and blocked my way. She tightly grasped my arm and said, Sister-in-law, help me. Save my son. As soon as I heard the word son, my pupils tightened, and I subconsciously hugged my son in my arms more tightly. I took 2 steps back, and looked at the person in front of me warily. This was the person who had wanted to throw my son downstairs 2 hours ago. Unexpectedly, Cheng Yisung knelt down on the ground and began to cry. Sister-in-law, that son of a bitch He Rambin ran away as soon as he got the money. He didn't have any intention of treating Xiaojian at all. He wants to let my son die slowly. Without money, Xiaojian has no way out but to die. Sister-in-law, I beg you to help me. I only have this one son. Cheng Yan's head bobbed up and down on the ground, knocking loudly. I sneered, and then my face suddenly changed. Gritting my teeth, I said, Now you know to call me sister-in-law? Why didn't you think of me as your sister-in-law when you were swapping children? Why didn't you think of me as your sister-in-law when you were about to throw Lei down from the 23rd floor? Now you know to come back to me and want me to help you. I'm not the Virgin Mary. No way. My series of rapid-fire words left Cheng Yin speechless. She could only keep knocking her head on the ground, begging for my forgiveness. I looked at her with disdain. One moment she wanted to kill my son, and now she turned around and expected me to help her. It seemed like she wanted all the good things for herself. Why don't you go buy a lottery ticket and see if you can win 50 million? I rolled my eyes and turned to leave. Suddenly, a hoarse voice sounded. Inin. I suddenly turned around and saw Cheng Liang looking haggard. He was still holding a ceramic urn in his hand. In just one day, he seemed to have aged several years. When Cheng Yin saw that Cheng Liang had returned, she seemed to have found a savior and rushed towards Cheng Liang. Brother! Shikadong Yisheng knelt down in front of Cheng Liang and tightly grasped Cheng Liang's hand. Cheng Liang, losing his balance, the ceramic urn slipped directly from his hand. With a crisp cracking sound, the ceramic urn shattered. Jinjiaja, a cloud of dust rose into the air. Cheng Liang's face turned deathly pale, and the surrounding air seemed to freeze instantly. Looking closely, the ceramic urn contained my mother-in-law's ashes. A gust of wind blew, and my mother-in-law's ashes scattered. When Cheng Yin saw the photo of my mother-in-law pasted on the fragments of the ceramic urn, she instantly collapsed. Mom! Her hands kept scratching on the ground, trying to pick up the ashes on the ground. But fate was against her. The wind was strong today, and the ashes had long been blown everywhere. The ground was clean, leaving nothing behind. I thought maybe my mother-in-law had gone to be reborn early. Cheng Yin knelt in the place where my mother-in-law's ashes had scattered for a whole night. Maybe she regretted it. Regretted that sentence about letting my mother-in-law die early and be reborn. After returning home, I immediately contacted my former friends and investigated He Rambin. The result was astonishing. He Rambin actually had another family outside, and he had a 3-month-old son. The 3-member family was living a very happy life. No wonder he couldn't wait for Xiaojian to die. It turned out he had a successor. I immediately told this news to Cheng Yan, who was looking for He Rambin everywhere. After hearing this, Cheng Yan's spirit completely collapsed. She smashed all the things in the house, and even cut He Rambin's underwear to pieces. Then she ran to the door of He Rambin's mistress's house, and started cursing loudly. You damned bitch, a worn-out shoe that's been slept with by others, a slut. Whore slut, knowing she's a mistress and still acting as one. A cheap slutty mistress who spreads her legs and looks for men all over the street, shameless. Give me the money back quickly, or none of us will have a good time. It's better to die together. Finally, she spread a quilt and slept at the door of the mistress's house. He Rambin was also a ruthless character. On the same day, he found several homeless people nearby. While Cheng Yin was sleeping at night, they dragged her to a nearby small forest and tormented her all night. The next day, Cheng Yin was found lying on the side of the road, half naked and in a trance. No matter what others asked, she kept mumbling, Slut mistress, worn out shoe, give back the money. Passers-by had to call the police. But before the police arrived, Cheng Yin ran away by herself. She ran to the door of the mistress's house. The next morning, when He Rambin saw that the quilt where Cheng Yin had slept was empty, he was overjoyed. When he went out to work, Whistling, Cheng Yin, who was squatting in the corner, rushed up and started scratching and tearing at him. You son of a bitch, you took the money and ignored your own son. You're a beast. Give me the money back quickly. Ranbin was also merciless. After punching and kicking Cheng Yin, he directly kicked her down the stairs. After Cheng Yin rolled down the stairs, she lay on the ground moaning in pain. But Ranbin didn't stop there. He stepped forward and tightly grasped Cheng Yan's neck, lifting her up. Cheng Yan's head was bleeding, and she twisted her body, her hands grabbing randomly. Somehow, she took out a shiny fruit knife from her body. She stabbed it straight into the carotid artery in Ranbin's neck. The moment the fruit knife was pulled out, blood spurted out several meters. Cheng Yan's pale face was instantly stained red. The mistress was so frightened by the scene that she collapsed on the ground, screaming wildly. Cheng Yan, her eyes blood red, stabbed the mistress in the stomach several times. The two of them lay in a pool of blood, watching helplessly as Cheng Yan threw their 3-month-old son downstairs, but they were powerless. Until the police arrived at the scene, Cheng Yan was still stabbing Ranbin's body crazily. Ranbin died on the spot. The mistress survived after emergency treatment, but her uterus was stabbed to pieces, and she could never have children again. And their son, after being thrown downstairs by Cheng Yan, due to the buffer of the branches and the green belt, was not in life-threatening danger. But his head was severely impacted, and he became a mentally retarded child. When Cheng Yan was caught on the spot, she was still staring at Ranbin's body and laughing wildly. After being identified, she had developed severe mental illness, and was sent to a mental hospital. After all these twists and turns, the money returned to me again. I paid for Xiaojian's treatment fees. Xiaojian was gradually getting better, and soon he was transferred from the intensive care unit to a general ward. Half a year later, except for their different looks, the two children showed no differences in other aspects. The originally dry, yellow and thin child had also become chubby and healthy. When they had just learned to walk, I led the two children to visit Cheng Yan, who was locked up in the mental hospital. Cheng Yan looked at the two children, and couldn't tell which one was her son at all. She could only keep shouting, Xiaojian, Xiaojian. But neither of the two children responded to her, because there was no Xiaojian here. There were only my Enin and Lele. Before leaving, I leaned close to her ear and whispered softly, Xiaojian is dead, and I will never tell you where he is buried. The next day, the director of the mental hospital called me. Cheng Yan had slit her wrists that night. She let all the blood in her body drain out and died. Before committing suicide, she had written the name Xiaojian all over the walls of the room. Cheng Liang buried Cheng Yan and my mother-in-law together. Buried with them was also the pile of imported milk powder that Cheng Yan had bought. Let them take it to drink on the way. After Xiaojian was taken back home by me, I renamed the two children. One was named Linanin, and the other was named Cheng Lele. One took my surname, and the other took Cheng Liang's surname. They would always be the children of Cheng Liang and me. Gradually they grew up. They learned to call mom and dad. They went to kindergarten, primary school, middle school. All the past was gone. They would never know, and they didn't need to know. They just needed to know that I was their mother. The spring sun was so warm and gentle. Looking at the two children playing and frolicking in the sun, running and chasing on the grass, I smiled. I only wished them a life of peace, happiness, and joy.